Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Indie Film Chat with your host, Anthony Watkins. I am Anthony Watkins, and I'm here to chat with directors who I admire, or about films that I admire from directors who I don't. So sit back and listen to us chat about filmmaking. In the studio today is Sam Longoria. Sam is best known for working on Ghostbusters. He worked in the visual effects department. He built the cameras that photographed the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Sam is also an actor and played a sizable part in my second feature comedy, Mall Robbers, back in 2006. Sam is in the studio today, and we're going to chat about making independent movies. So, Sam, welcome to the show.
Hello, Tony. Gosh, I'm so glad we could finally do this.
We've talked about this for a long time.
A long time.
We finally got around to scheduling it.
Yes, it's good. I was on my way to Canada, thank goodness, and stopped in.
So how did we meet?
How did we meet? I was in Lake Stevens, and I was going through eBay. I was selling off a bunch of stuff, and I had found out what practically every musician has found out, that if you buy gear and then you sell it for more, you actually get to keep the remainder, and then you could buy more gear. And so I was doing that with filmmaking equipment. Here's this guy who's making dollies and selling them, and he had made apparently an entire feature-length motion picture, and was doing the unheard of thing of distributing it himself through eBay.
It's my first film, Counseling Day. I distributed it through eBay. This is probably 2003, 4, and 5. And I must have got a phone call. I think my parents got a phone call from Sam from Hollywood.
Yes.
Saying he liked the film and wanted to chat. And that's the first time that's got to be 2005, I think.
Yes,
4
yes.
or 5.
Yeah, early on.
3 or 4.
Nobody had thought of distributing his own movie at the time. In fact, I wrote an article about it, and I think I kept calling you brilliant. And because you were. It was very smart. It was obvious, but nobody was doing it. And I'll bet you sold a bunch of those.
Well, I was selling camera equipment first, and I stumbled across the idea of promoting the movie on eBay because I'd sold about 35 camera dollies that I'd made out of my garage. Backing up a little bit, I'd made this homemade dolly that was burly enough to hold a couple of people in a big film camera, and was able to make them for pretty cheap. And so I sold the one that we used on Counseling Day to help with post-production, and it sold immediately. So I just made a couple more, and I kept selling them. Well, I had people interested in our first film, and so I just put it on eBay as an independent movie with the behind-the-scenes documentary, and it started selling rather well. So I think the first time that we met was on the set of Death Planet.
Oh, my goodness.
My dad and I drove down to Seattle, and you were the camera guy, the cinematographer on a low-budget sci-fi movie. And I'm spacing on the dates. That's got to be 2004 or 5.
Yep. Actually, yes, that would be 2003 or 2004, because
Right.
we were working on that thing right along. Yes, I think you came by. We were shooting in a geodesic dome, and somebody had liked this geodesic dome so much, they turned it into a strip club. And so there were girls and, equipment for holding girls up in the air and all kinds of things. And I'm just trying to light this geodesic dome and shoot this movie and ignore everything, which is what you have to do when you're doing a feature.
You guys had filmed numerous scenes out of that movie in different levels of that geodesic dome.
Mm-hmm.
Spaceship scenes and a planet surface type stuff. I remember you were swinging a camera around on kind of a homemade, what would you call that? It was
string.
A rope.
It was a string. I have a reputation for when I'm gigging, when I'm out shooting stuff as a cinematographer, I will use pieces of foam rubber, to pad my knees, and I will use pieces of string to rig. The camera can be floating in the air as long as you've tied it to a sturdy beam or something. And I had just gotten used to doing stuff that way. If I have a ball of string, I'm completely equipped. I don't even need a truck with gear in it. And the guy that I was doing this with kept saying, "I can't believe it. You have rigged this whole scene with a piece of string." I said, "Quiet," and went on shooting, trying to get through this. And the thing that I remember the most about that show was that, like your shows, there was no sleep at all.
Well, let's get to that real quick.
Yeah,
Then.
yeah.
You've acted in a few of my productions over the years, and the first big one was Mall Robbers. That was a comedy film we shot in the summer of '06 up here north of Seattle at a mall. You played one of the lead characters in the picture, and I can't for the life of me quite remember how you got the gig. I don't know if I knew.
I think I threatened you.
I knew you were a camera guy and a director. I didn't know you were an actor necessarily,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure how. Maybe you just said you wanted to be a part of it. I don't remember.
It was fun. I liked it. It was hard seeing myself. It's really interesting to see how you've let your body go. And I remember seeing dailies going, "Oh my Lord, I'm not just fat. I'm fat. This is terrible." And it gave me a slap in the face, and I had to actually start taking care of myself again, which was good. But I loved doing the movie, and you had written it, and it was very funny, and you had all these funny characters. The thing I remember the most about your movies was, at your core, you must have a profound appreciation for the Three Stooges,
Certainly.
which I do too. And Jay Leno once said that the difference between men and women is that men like the Three Stooges and women just don't. And that's pretty much true. It bears up under scrutiny. But yeah,
I don't know if I'd trust people who don't like the Three Stooges. However, I heard the other day that Jerry Seinfeld doesn't like them, so that goes to show what I know, right?
I don't know. I've never heard him say that he doesn't like the Stooges. I don't know if I could. I just don't know how I'd cope with that. If that
He was talking with the world's greatest actor, Alec Baldwin. They were doing a coffee show. It's called Coffee and Cars or something.
Oh
like
yeah,
that. Comedians and coffee
driving
and cars.
around,
So they
driving
were talking,
around.
and neither of them like the Three Stooges. They can only take them for a few minutes. And I love the Three Stooges.
Yeah, I know. But they're so hardworking. I mean, it takes a long time to be able to take a good poke in the eye from your brother, who's got two fingers trying to make you blind. That is a very high level of low comedy, and I like them. I like them very much. Anyway, I was watching Counseling Day, and I'm a visual effects guy, so I know how these things are done. But I knew that you had thrown a dummy off of the roof,
Yeah.
and that it went past the camera and landed on the ground. But you did it perfectly. It was wonderful. I jumped to my feet. I went, "Oh my Lord." That's when I started calling to see if I could find you on the phone. Because it was just very clever. They certainly don't teach that in school.
2003 was before Facebook, was before YouTube.
Yep.
So getting a hold of somebody was a little bit more difficult.
Yep. Exactly. Who had a phone in his pocket?
Right.
Nobody.
So let's back up and let me introduce you.
Sure.
Your name
Hi.
is Sam Longoria. You're from Hollywood, worked in films for a long time. Why don't you start with how you got involved with filmmaking?
How I got involved with filmmaking. I was a kid in elementary school. I never did homework after the 5th grade, ever. And I sat in the back of the room, and I was very fortunate. I found a copy of the World Book Encyclopedia, which had a great article about the movie that had come out that year, 1965, Mary Poppins. And my two major influences were Mary Poppins for visual effects, because reading this article over and over and over every day, I got to be rather conversant with the rank sodium vapor traveling matte system, which was yellow screen instead of blue screen. And it created a matte and separated an actor from the background in real time. And so I was just caught up in this. I had no idea how you would put that to use, but I certainly knew about film densities and what colors your screen had to be and all of that stuff. And so the other thing that I truly loved was Blake Edwards comedies, which they would come on TV every so often. So you would see The Pink Panther, or you would see it's just his wonderful, wonderful comedies. And so, of course, the first time I went to the Oscars, I rode up in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in an elevator with Blake Edwards and his wife, Julie Andrews. And it was weird. And I said, "You guys got me started in this whole thing. I'm very glad to meet you." And they were very nice. And it's pretty much true. The film business is a very small town. I'm not saying everybody knows everybody else, but it is possible to know the people that you have admired for years just suddenly, and now they're your friend and you can talk to them. And that's what I love about Hollywood. It's the little town where they make movies. Burbank is also really good. It's part of the Hollywood thing. But I was in Renton, which is south of Seattle, and it was where they made jet aircraft. So you'd say, "I'm a filmmaker." They'd say, "That's nice." But, they would say it in the sort of way that they would say it to a child who announced he was going to fly off of the barn, dressed in a cape. It just was not going to happen. Everybody gave me that message 1,000 times a day. But all it made me was, I guess, delusional. I was like, I'm going to Hollywood and I'm going to make movies. That's what I'm going to do for a living. But I didn't know how to do it. And I was in high school, and I was 3 years younger than the kids in my class. They absolutely hated me. I had no friends. I read all I could about comedy because I loved comedy. I loved laughing. I loved making people laugh. And I knew all that early on. So I lived in the library. I lived near that World Book Encyclopedia. And I just read and read and read and read and read, which came in handy years later when I was a contestant on the TV show Jeopardy. That came out rather well. I hit a streak of movie questions and just didn't look back. It was great, great fun. But anyway, movies saved my life, because if I had just been a kid not doing homework and not paying attention to the people around him saying, "Well, that thing you want to do, you can't do that." If I had listened to those people, I would have been stuck for the rest of my life. Instead, one day, I don't know why, but I came up with a joke that I wanted to tell people, but I wanted it to be, it was a visual joke. It was not something that I could actually describe to people. It's something I would have to actually, photograph. And so I just sort of naturally got into the idea that I'm making a movie. And my first movie cost, I think, $10. And I got that with a coffee can going around saying, "Would you contribute to my movie, man?" Which is how we talked in those days. And I got $10 together. I bought Super 8 film. My high school would not lend the camera that they had specifically to lend to students. They wouldn't lend it to me because I was, 3 years younger than the regular class. And I don't know, I might do something weird like throw it off the roof, which I did. And I padded it very, very heavily. And the shot came out. It was very good. The movie got done. That's the hardest part, folks. The movie got done, and it went off to a film contest, and it won awards. Then I made 3 other movies. They all won awards. Most of what I've done has been commercial movies. You can only do one thing at a time. And I was making commercial movies for a long time. So when I came back to Seattle, the city of my birth, everybody said, "Oh, do you have a movie that you've posted somewhere where I can look at your work?" And they're all so dismissive. It's amazing. And I didn't know how to answer that except to say, "Well, yeah, they're in Blockbuster." And now I would say, "Yeah, they're at Netflix," or wherever movies are streaming now. Everything has changed drastically. Back when you could mail a disc to anybody, you were the king of that. And I was right on board immediately. Like, wow, You have just sidestepped having to go talk somebody into distributing your movie, which is the major deal.
So, what was Ghostbusters your first major movie you worked on?
No, I actually my first job was being a concert critic at KVI Radio in Seattle. I was in a Jack Benny sound-alike contest. Oh, Rochester, bring the Maxwell around to the front, you know. And I got to go see Jack Benny. And it turned out to be his last performance. I mean, I had nothing to do with it. That's been thoroughly researched. But I got a job at the radio station because Jack Benny said, "This boy is very funny. Give him a job." And so Gene Autry, who owned the station, gave me a job. Okay, that's pretty good pedigree, I think. And then in the late part of the 70s, we had a motion picture seminar in Seattle. And Robert Boyle, who was Alfred Hitchcock's art director, came through and we struck up a friendship. And he said, "Do you know of any place that has a lot of lakes?" I said, "Why?" "Because Hitch is going to make a movie called The Short Night." And nobody knew it was going to be his last movie and it wouldn't get finished. But he said, if you can go do some location scouting and send me back some snaps of what you're shooting, of lakes, place with lakes. And so I did. I went off and I took pictures of Lake Tapps down there by Auburn, Washington, and it has a whole bunch of little lakes. And then I sent the photos back after going to Photomat. Nobody remembers Photomat, but my joke at the time was I have a development deal with Photomat. But he sent me a check, and hey, I was a professional. I was working for Alfred Hitchcock. It was Shamley Productions, his production company. And so that was my first movie job. And then I built a print shop in Enumclaw, and I bought, with the money from the print shop, a movie theater. And now I had a place I could show my movie in 35 millimeter. I bought a 35 millimeter movie camera and a portable projector through the mail. And so I would bring people and show them my movie on a big screen in a theater. So I had an advantage over most people who were trying to sell a movie. And in fact, I brought people there from the motion picture seminar, some Oscar winners, and showed them what I was doing and managed to keep them laughing. And so at the end of one of these seminars, some of the guys who worked on Star Wars, Robbie Blaylock, Jamie Short, said, "Why don't you come down to Hollywood and stay at our townhouse? This will be great." And it was great. And that was what I did 1 year to the day after seeing them win the Oscar for Star Wars. I was there at their house in their place making movies and all that stuff. So
that's about 78?
Yeah, it was 78 when the Oscars were that they won.
For Star Wars.
It was 79.
Okay.
I ended up speaking at a motion picture seminar at the Seattle Opera House and talked about my movie, put my 35 millimeter footage up there on the huge screen at the Opera House. It was just wonderful. Suddenly you see cars that you shot out in Sprague, Washington, out in the middle of nowhere, and they're life-size now on this big screen. And people are laughing because it's a funny thing that you put on. I really recommend making a movie and showing it on a big screen. Now, that's almost irrelevant now because
Sure.
people are making movies they're going to show on their watch or their phone or whatever. When you got your iPhone, Tony, that was the first time I sort of got a glimpse of how this is going to work because you said, "Oh, would you like to see my movie?"
Right, whip it out and show you the last production we did.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is. How did you get started with all of that? You lived through the time where there was no cell phones and nobody could just call anybody else. And
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I mean, wow, how did I get started in making pictures?
yeah, you changed everything for me. I was just sort of walking around behind you for a while going,
Well,
I see, get a phone. I can see
I'm a
this.
product of the 80s, meaning, my influences, of course, are going to be Steven Spielberg style, fun, action 80s movies. And my independent streak of movies is very much a product of Kevin Smith and
Clerks and those. Yeah.
Sure, Brothers McMullen with Ed Burns and and Robert Rodriguez's movie, El Mariachi. No, all those 16 millimeter independent, no budget movies from the mid '90s is what opened my eyes to making movies. So that's where my interest has been ever since. As far as making movies, is just ultra low budget. The question about how we marketed, we stumbled across the eBay thing, and that lasted about 3 or 4 years. And the landscape just keeps changing. Nobody's buying DVDs now. I haven't sold a DVD of our movie in a while. It's all online and downloads and streaming and phones, cell phones. Yeah, that's a big subject. Real quick before I forget, how do you draw a line from 1979 to Ghostbusters? I kind of want to touch on what you did for Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters was 18 months you worked for them. How long were you on that production?
I worked at Boss Film, which is where we did Ghostbusters, for much of the 80s.
So that would have been early 80s, 82, 83?
Yeah, I headed down to Hollywood to work on Ghostbusters. Now, there's quite a lot that happened in between, and it's only 5 years. 1978, I went down and got to see the Star Wars guys and got to see what Hollywood was like and realized, yes, this is the place to be. This is excellent. And then I went back to Enumclaw and was homesick for Hollywood. But I had an office in Hollywood now, and I had worked, a friend of mine at Universal, and another new friend, John Landis, called out to me when I was driving through Laurel Canyon, and he goes, "Hey, Washington," because I had Washington plates. And I recognized him oddly from an article that somebody had done about a movie he made that was called Schlock. In it, he wore a gorilla suit. I believe the gorilla suit was made by Rick Baker. And they were all kids, and this movie got made and got finished. And now he was making a movie. He had made Kentucky Fried Movie, which was a production of the Kentucky Fried Theater, which was the Zucker brothers, who had built a theater in Santa Monica, and their theater, they kept coming up with stuff that, if it was funny, it would end up in their movie script. And so they made Kentucky Fried Movie, which was just a wonderful movie and very silly and very weird. Mm-hmm. And so I got invited to come over to Universal. They were doing this thing, and I sort of got pushed into a corner. "You're an actor, right? Yeah, okay. We need for you to make crowd noises for this party scene for this little movie." I had no idea what the movie was. I went home up to Enumclaw. I was shooting my movie, and by that point, my cast were all talking about this movie they had seen. It was a fraternity movie. It had John Belushi in it. I said, "What's it called?" They said, "It's called Animal House." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Really?" And so that was my first acting gig. I was doing wallow work in National Lampoon's Animal House, which has been
party scenes, the crowd noises.
Yeah.
That those are some of yours.
Yeah, I mean, you're not trying to sound like Scooby Doo like I just did, but wallow is a good voiceover thing actors can do, and so I got to see it up close, how they do looping, how they do dialogue replacement, how they do all of that stuff. And my friend was the dialogue editor, and he was a wonderful mentor, helping me learn how to do movie sound. And I also worked on some movies with Walter Murch, who is arguably the best film editor alive, and a wonderful, wonderful sound designer. In fact, he invented the term sound designer. And he was my editing neighbor on a movie that I worked on in Berkeley. But anyway, that was 1978 is when I went to Hollywood. And then 79, I was back working on finishing up my feature. And then what happened was I bought this movie theater, and I bought this print shop, or I built the print shop, bought the movie theater, and got a job on an animated film in Portland. And that came about because Starlog magazine ran an article about me and how I was off in the weeds making a movie at the base of Mount Rainier. And so that got the interest of a guy who had won an Oscar making animated movies. And so I got hired on to build him a computer motion control system like I had built out of a Radio Shack computer. And so it's 300-mile a week commute. And that's what I was doing. And I did my print shop, I did my movie theater, I worked at the radio station in town on Sundays, and then I drove down to Portland and worked on programming computers and doing clay animation. So there was absolutely no time, and I was exhausted all the time, and I was driving off the road when I was driving from Portland because I would fall asleep. And so one day, some very strange circumstances happened, and I ended up going to the Oscars. And so I went to the Oscars and ran into Richard Edlund, who was the head of ILM at the time, and he had been the first cameraman on Star Wars. And I had met him at the motion picture seminar in Seattle. And so he said, "Oh, you're here at the Academy Awards. Well, that's very good. Now I know you're serious." It's like, "Oh, okay." And so he told me that he was going to be heading out and forming his own company, and that I should keep my ear to the ground. And I stayed on the phone talking to him so that I didn't lose touch, and so that I could see what was going on. And there was a real nice friendship there too. And so I would call him up from my theater, and he'd say, "How's the animation going?" from the claymated movie. This was a Mark Twain feature, and I thought that we got it done. It never went anywhere. It never did anything, and I just sort of gave up on it. It was in an interview. It was in an article in the American Cinematographer magazine, which is the Bible of the cameraman group, and the movie sort of came to life. Maybe 20 years later, suddenly people were sending me emails saying, "Did you work on The Adventures of Mark Twain?" And suddenly it was distributed, and suddenly all these people were telling me they had seen it and they liked it, and all these people I was working with were saying, "Oh, I saw that when I was 9." Well, that felt good. Gosh, that's great. That's the first time that business started. You start finding out you're older than the people around you. And so anyway, worked on that movie, and it led to the Oscars. That led to getting work on Ghostbusters when all the technical guys at ILM moved to Los Angeles because they didn't want to work in Northern California anymore. They wanted to get back in what they thought of as the real movie business. And ILM certainly didn't suffer. All the equipment had already been built by then, and they certainly, Dennis Muren, who was at ILM, has more Oscars than any other person alive. So everybody prospered from that split. And so we were at Boss Film, which was in the marina down in Marina del Rey, which is the pricey part of Venice, California. And we were working on Ghostbusters, and then 2010, which was a sequel to 2001, and then a whole bunch of other movies, Fright Night and Poltergeist 2. I can't remember all these things. You can look them up, and and so I was busy working on those, and I recently found out something that I had no idea. I mentioned that Animal House has recently been pulled into the Library of Congress for the National Film Registry. Wow. And Ghostbusters had that happen to it last year. And so a friend of mine called up and said, "Wow, I worked on Airplane, and that's been brought into the Library of Congress." And he said, "You're in one too. You're in Ghostbusters." So I have always tried not to compare myself to other people, because you end up unhappy no matter how you compare. If you compare really well, you're unhappy because you can't tell anybody, and because they will hate you. And if you compare very poorly, then you are all hangdog, like, "Oh, gee, maybe it won't work," and your self-esteem takes a hit. So I tried very hard not to compare myself to other people. But in this instance, it's like, well, let's see if the movies I worked on, any of them have gotten through. So They have. There are 4 of them. So, and it's not something that I paid attention to the whole time. And it's very strange how a career will be that way. You will do all these things, and then you will sort of at some point turn around and look and go, oh yeah, I did that. Oh, I did that. Oh, that's interesting. And then you realize I have a career now. At the time, it's just you're struggling and struggling. It
Well,
doesn't
sure,
feel
that's
like a career.
that's the way freelance works. You only have a career when you look backwards. When you're not sure where your next job comes from, and looking forward, it doesn't look like a career.
No, it
But if you
doesn't.
look backwards, you have quite a track record. That's that's the only way that you can calculate, how successful you are when you're doing freelance type film work. So you started visual effects.
Mm-hmm.
I know you mainly as an actor, although you're. What do you consider yourself most? A director, writer, comedian?
I'm a filmmaker. I'm mostly a producer.
Okay.
I have steered all of my income, I mean, every penny, and then everything I could borrow, into making my movies. And at this point, I'm trying to wrap everything up. It's not like I'm
So here's a story for you.
oh, good.
So we're on the set of Mall Robbers. For the audience out there, you can go to our Vimeo page or check the notes at the bottom of the podcast, and you can there'll be links to where you can find some of the movies we've made. Mall Robbers was the second movie that we made back in the summer of 2006, like I mentioned. We are filming at a mall here north of Seattle at night. It's a story about a group of people breaking into the mall at night. Turns out there's 3 different groups of people breaking into the same mall on the same night, unbeknownst to each other. And you have these crazy security guards that were trying to stop them. So we're shooting at night, and they were renovating part of the mall that I didn't know about. We get there, and all we hear is banging and clanging and construction noise. And, I was getting kind of hot under the collar because we'd made arrangements to shoot there for the month. And
I'm going to interrupt you.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. You tossed this off like it's nothing. You got a mall. I mean, a
mall.
whole mall. This is stores with thousands and maybe millions of dollars worth of gear.
Yes.
And you got them to go, oh, yes, you're trustworthy. It's all right. Lock up when you leave.
In retrospect, that's quite an achievement. At the time, it didn't
It's
seem
fantastic.
like a big deal.
I've never, ever known anyone to
But the
do that.
production value that added, is
it's
it's
great.
almost impossible to buy. Although now malls are dying, so maybe you can find a mall for cheap now. There's plenty of empty malls across the country, but back then malls were the thing, and they were, hard to
Anyway,
get
my
into.
hat is off to you. I've never seen anyone do that. That's a production.
And a side note, we'll probably cover this in detail in a podcast episode specifically for Mall Robbers, but we shot at that mall for around 30 nights, and they were going to charge us about $100 a day. I think it was $125 a day to cover lights and the security guy. And when we went to pay that, it was about a $3,500 bill. The mall manager said that we were such a problem-free production, and he didn't hear one thing from us that he waived the fee entirely. So we got them all for free. There was no charges associated with that location, which is another thing that's difficult to do when you're making
Who
movies.
does that?
So we're shooting at the mall, and we've got all this construction noise that is banging in the background, and I can't use the audio. And, this is my second feature. We made Counseling Day in 2, this one's in 6. And I had, I was pretty married to the idea of using production sound, and I wasn't very versed in ADR or looping or post sound effects, all that kind of stuff. And you were the first one to tell me, just shoot it and loop it later.
Yeah.
I'm like, we can't do that. How are we gonna? It'll work. It'll be fine. So we shot many of those scenes with banging in the background and came back and looped them later. Well,
And how did it come out?
since then, I read that Spielberg and David Fincher was talking about. He heard Spielberg loops everything. He doesn't use any
Absolutely.
production audio. So Fincher doesn't use any production audio.
Mm-hmm.
So that seed that you planted, now I don't use any production audio at all. I use it as a guide track. We're
Yep.
shooting a detective show right now, a 6-part web series. In the previous movie we shot, Man of War, nothing in the movie was from the production, because you can go into a studio and you can have complete control. Just like you have complete control over lighting, you have complete control over your set, your actors. You're making all these choices that you're totally controlling. Why not control the audio? Why not have a second bite at the apple to have another performance? You can add emphasis to words. You can clean it up. You can shoot quicker. You don't have to worry about the train, the truck, all that kind of stuff. So That's one of the things I learned from you is just to loop everything, or not everything,
Well,
but
I learned that from Walter Murch. Walter Murch, when he was doing Apocalypse Now, this little movie that they made in the Philippines about the Vietnam War, and it has explosions, and it has the Flight of the Valkyries, and it has all of this insane soundtrack, incredibly good. When they were done shooting, they didn't have a foot of location sound because it was all in a hurry getting this thing done. Now they're shooting with 35 millimeter cameras, and the cameras are noisy, and they, you have to. That was always the big thing. As far as I'm concerned, the cool part about the digital revolution is, yes, it's easy to edit and all that other stuff, but the cool thing is you've got digital quality sound when you're recording anything, even on the cheapest recorder. The sound quality is professional. It's excellent, and you can just loop everything. Just go into a room, fill it with coats. I have done lots of looping in a closet, and when you do that, you suddenly have a chance of your soundtrack being great, not just good, great. And the people who see a movie that is an indie movie and the soundtrack, I'm going to say it here, stinks. I mean, it's really terrible. The standard soundtrack for an independent movie is awful. And if they had spent just a few hundred hours working on the soundtrack, their soundtrack would sound as good as a Hollywood feature. It would. It just takes work. And when you're done, the work is worth it, because people see your movie, and when it has a bad soundtrack, they don't know why it's bad. They just think the movie is bad. They don't know that it's because that everything's in an echoey room and the sound keeps cutting in and out. Nobody has finessed the tracks so that they overlap, or they fade out at the proper time. So the sound pushes the story forward, which is the big thing. That's what your soundtrack should be doing. You don't ever have a sound in your movie soundtrack that does not push the story forward. And so I was very happy to hear you say that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was very happy to discover it, and I wandered around for a long time saying, "Is that true? Do you not really record what you're going to use?" They would say, "We record as well as we can, but we have it in our budget that we're going to replace every last scrap of sound."
Sure. You see, one of the things that I get complaints about from people that aren't aware of this idea is that it doesn't sound as real as their production audio. But that's a fallacy, in the same way that if you put in a scratch track of music, that suddenly in your mind that music belongs there, even if it's a pop song you can't afford. No matter what else you put in there, it doesn't sound as good as that original. So you're only saying that about the production audio because you heard it first and you were there. But your ADR, your looping, you're going back and fixing it, will sound better to the audience, who doesn't know any better. The audience only sees what you decided to show them. They weren't there on the set. They're not psychologically attached to the original track.
As the filmmaker, you need to cheat. You need to, stack the deck in your favor. You need to do everything to make your movie sound and look and be as good as possible. Or what's the point? I mean, why are we doing this? This costs a fortune, and it takes away from our health and our wealth and our goodwill. It just does. The reason that you do it is because you've imagined a movie being a wonderful, entertaining experience, or maybe a documentary, or maybe some other form of movie. But whatever it is, the audience shouldn't have to sweat through it and going, "What did he say? What was that? Who? Oh, huh?" And that's what happens when your track is bad. I helped a bunch of Seattle people do that, because Seattle has lots and lots of film contests and film. What's the word? Well, they make a whole bunch of movies. Okay, they are all short movies, which means they cannot be sold. There is no way they are ever going to get their money back from making a short movie. It will get somebody to hire you, or it will get somebody to notice you, but you can't sell a short movie. And that has not changed ever. There's only two parts to the film business. One is make the movie. Two is sell the movie. And most people just do one or the other. You see guys who are always selling their movie and saying, "Here's the story. I'm making my pitch. I'll tell you," and you don't want to hear his pitch. You don't you don't care about his movie. So why are they selling it to a whole bunch of people who don't care? I don't know. I'm utterly baffled why they would do that. The other thing is, or the other people are always they're always making the movie and then never selling it. It's like, a farmer and he grows pumpkins and he puts them in his yard and they rot there. But does he take them to market on his truck and sell them? No. Okay, you would say that farmer was mentally ill. But most filmmakers are that way. They make a movie and then you say, well, where's it going? What are you going to do with it? Oh, we're going to put it into festivals and see what happens. That is not a business plan. That is not anything like a plan.
No.
And yeah, so they're not going to sell that film, and so it's going to rot. It's, and I am as faulty as anybody. I have 4 full features that I made before I went to Hollywood, actually, and I worked on them and stuff. And so that's one of my big things this year, is pulling everything out of my warehouses and distributing them, because now I can. This is wonderful. It used to be that I would have to put those films under my arm and go from distribution company to distribution company and hope somebody will pick it up. I don't have to do that now. There used to be 300 guys in my Rolodex who were all in distribution. Now there are 6.
Yeah.
There are 6. And you should be able to know them already. There's YouTube. That's really a distribution channel. Mm-hmm. Your movie can play anywhere in the world if you have a YouTube account. Same thing with Vimeo. Excellent quality, too, and better security. And then I'll leave it to the other 5 or...
Sure, there's a dozen
Yahoo
outlets.
And Netflix and all those things. And the one that I'm interested in, because they have sort of... it's a one-stop shop, is... and it will come to me later when I have no use for it. A distributor.
Oh, distributor. Okay.
Yeah, that one is really interesting, because all you have to do really is sign up. You sign up and you have a movie and you stream it and you're done. And they split the money with you. And isn't that the deal? That's the whole deal. That's why we do this. That's really as easy as it should be, because we don't want to spend all of the time raising money for a movie or distributing it. We want to spend the fun part, which honestly is about 20% of your time. 80% of your time is trying to get people to be in your movie or put up the money for your movie or help you distribute it or whatever. That's the Pareto principle. That's 80-20.
Okay, so I'm suspecting that a large percentage of our listeners are going to be younger folks who like to make movies, who want to make movies, who probably aren't going to go work for a studio and work up the ladder in Hollywood. They're going to grab a camera and they're going to make a feature in their hometown and try to distribute it. I suppose some of the questions I have for you is, what's the point of going that route? Is there any foreseeable way to make that pay off?
Well, it's how I got here.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, that's really all I have to point at. I worked on more than 30 movies, and some of them were nominated for Oscars, and some of those have been put in the Library of Congress. I mean, I could quit now.
So a guy in the middle of Ohio has a couple of buddies. They got a little bit of money. They're going to get a camera and make a movie. What should they do with it? What's
weird is I used to build motion picture cameras for a living. Suddenly, that income stream was gone. What? Everyone's shooting little digital cameras? Why, this is ridiculous. Well, it was ridiculous, and I had to figure out how to change my income streams. So I don't build cameras anymore, and I don't have to. In the middle of the night, on any day, you can walk into Walmart, and for $500, you can be a completely equipped digital filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And when you come out, I mean, I know people who've made feature films on their phone. I don't recommend it because the lenses aren't very good, or as good. Or a GoPro Hero, or any of those things. And the guy at Walmart doesn't care. And if you break it, you can come back and afford to buy another one, which we never were able to do. as far as you don't have to rent anything. You buy it on eBay and resell it when you're done shooting with it. Or if you're really desperate, you can buy it on a credit card and return it in under 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the use of the gear. Just don't break it, and you'll be fine. There are so many ways of getting your movie done, but the first thing is you have to realize that everybody will try and stop you. And you have to actually look at it that way, because you get distracted. There's the job, there's the girlfriend or wife, there's the house payment, there's the all this stuff.
So are you of the opinion that if you don't absolutely have to make a movie, you probably shouldn't?
No, you shouldn't.
Go find something else to do?
Buy a ticket.
Yes.
Go see movies you like.
I sometimes wonder if I'm not a better consumer of movies than I am a maker of movies.
Well, I've seen lots of people's movies, and yours are funny. They make me laugh, and that's the point of a comedy.
That's a hard thing to do sometimes, is to actually make somebody make a verbal laugh just by an idea in your head put up on screen.
Yeah, because you can't fake it.
Mm-mm.
If somebody smiles at your movie, you are not in the right business.
Right.
They have to actually laugh. And I heard Mel Brooks say that it's 4 times. It has to be 4 times funnier than you think it is in order for it actually to move an audience to laugh. It has to be screamingly funny for it to work. And your movie made me laugh. And that's really the test for comedy. If your movie is supposed to be scary, it should be really scary. I mean, seriously, people should not want to look at your movie. But they have to. Yeah.
There is so much content today, and the audience is expecting technical perfection pretty much because the equipment is so cheap.
Yep.
When I got going with Counseling Day, Mall Robbers, Man of War, those are all shot on film because that was the cheapest way to get the film look. Super 16.
Yep.
It looks great. For the time, it was expensive. I mean, we're spending $15,000 just on film stock for one movie. So there's so much content, and it's got to be technically really good. Audio, picture, lighting. You got to get a lighting guy. You can't just use available light and expect it to look great. So for the first-time filmmaker out there, they're not going to be hitting all those notes. They're not going to be technically perfect. The storytelling isn't going to be great. You know, it's going to be a learning curve. It's going to be a learning experience. What advice do you have for some guy that's got a first movie that probably isn't, super great? How does he recoup his investment? Do you have any thoughts on that?
How does he recoup his investment? Well, if he makes how-to movies and he's teaching something in his movie that a whole bunch of people want to buy to learn, he has a very good shot of recouping his investment.
Well, let me refine the question then.
Yeah.
Most likely they've already made it.
Yeah.
It's probably a story about a couple of guys in an apartment. We've seen a million things on YouTube. I'm trying to corner you, push you into saying certain things like
what? What do you want me to say?
Well, the listeners of this podcast are going to want some information about it. Is there hope at the end of the tunnel for something they've made, or should they just count it up as a learning experience and try to get better, or perhaps use that as a springboard for freelance work?
Tony?
Yes.
You have eaten pancakes. I've seen you eat pancakes.
Yeah.
Do you like pancakes?
Do I like them?
Mm-hmm.
They're okay, I guess.
Do you like making them?
I guess.
The basic rule of making pancakes is you throw away the first couple.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. They're awful.
That's true.
They are grisly. You don't want to eat those. They're greasy.
I have to eat the first 2 because my wife gets the second 2. So I'm stuck with them.
Oh, I hope she doesn't hear you say that. Anyway, it's true for film, too. Your first script is going to sit in the back of a drawer somewhere.
Yeah.
If you send it to somebody, he's just going to go, uh-oh, and avoid you from then on because you're one of those guys who's trying to sell him a script. And your movies, same thing. Your first movie will stink. Now, my first movie, I got an award, but it was rather stinky.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at it afterwards, and you go, gee, for a guy who had $10 to make a film so he could get out of high school, and that's another story, but it actually got me passing grades. And otherwise, I would still be in high school. That movie looked pretty good because by comparison, everybody else was making terrible movies. And Salvador Dali said that about painters. He said, it is not that Dali is so good. It is that all the other painters are so bad. And you have to sort of look at, where can I fit in this market? Is there a whole bunch of bad artists here? Well, how will I look compared to them? Those are the film contests you get into. Those are the festivals you enter. I have a friend who had literally every award you can get in advertising. Every single award. And he's an animator. And I said, how do you have all these awards? And he said, I hired college kids, and all they do is ship my movies to festivals. And that was his entire strategy, and by golly, it worked. You just sort of have a plan, and you follow the plan. If your movie is really great, and it's the first time that you've ever picked up a camera or edited, first time you made a movie and it turns out great, I will eat my shoe.
It's true, yeah.
Because most people's movies are not great. Now, you should always be kind to the kid who has made a movie, and you don't go, wow, you think this is good? You don't tease people. And recognize sooner or later he's going to be good or he's going to quit. And so the advice that I would give is the obvious advice. If it's not good yet, what will make it good? Practice. Rehearsal if you're an actor. Writing another script. You only get to be a good writer by writing. You only get to be and filmmaking is an adjunct of literature, so it's a form of writing. So the only way you get to be a good filmmaker is by making films.
Yeah, that's one of the problems I have with directing is that you don't get the opportunity to direct too much. Even if you're an independent guy doing low budget stuff, you're not directing every day. So you can write. You can write every day. You can edit other people's material every day. You can do paint every day. But directing a crew and a cast on a real set, that happens, once a year if you're busy.
And the producer is watching you as the director. And if you take very long to get the first shot off, you won't be working on this picture tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're not kidding around. There's millions of dollars at stake.
Side note, you mentioned that. I've had a few shooting days where it took a long time to get that first shot off, and that's a demoralizing feeling.
Isn't it? I always do it the night before and don't tell anyone. There's a very famous story about the studio sends a guy to go out and keep track of, he's a studio representative, and his job is to follow John Ford, who is arguably the best filmmaker who ever lived. He got more Oscars as best director than anybody. And his pictures are mostly cowboy pictures, and they're brilliant cowboy pictures. And so, the studio sent this guy to follow him around and see what time he got his first shot done and all that stuff. So the guy, and this is a legend, a legendary story, the guy comes up to him at some point and says, Mr. Ford, you are 4 pages behind schedule. And he says, give me the script. He tears 4 pages out and says, we're back on schedule.
That's great.
It is, because really, aren't you the guy who's determining what has to be in the picture and isn't?
Yeah.
And if it means you'll work or you'll never work again, wouldn't you tear those pages out?
Yeah.
That's a brilliant guy. And he made it work. Nobody knows which pages they were.
I've done scenes where we were so far behind schedule that I set the camera up in the corner, shot the whole scene from that corner, and said, okay, we're moving on.
That's
we
right.
got the scene in 10 minutes instead of 4 hours.
Yep.
That'll catch you right up.
Orson Welles, when he got to town, to Hollywood, got to be friends with Charlie Chaplin. And the two of them used to go and have lunch and all that stuff. It was the oldest filmmaker in Hollywood and the newest, youngest one. And they were fast friends. And the number one thing that they shared was they were so opposite. They were diametrically opposed in terms of camera work. Charlie Chaplin would set the camera up and leave it there all day and not move it. He would have all the action happen in front of the camera. Orson Welles would move the camera and put it on a crane and swoop it and dig a hole in the
Right.
in the floor so that he could get a low angle and all that stuff. And which was the better filmmaker? There's room in art for all those people.
For everything.
So are you a person who just lets the camera play, lets the scene play in front of the camera? Then you are Jim Jarmusch. Did you ever see Stranger Than Paradise?
Oh, it's been a while.
Yeah, yeah. It's just the camera's in the corner, just looking. Every shot is that way. Every shot's a master shot. Who else does that? Woody Allen does that. Every one of Woody's scenes, he does move the camera occasionally and all that stuff, but his shows are not about that. They're about an ensemble saying lines that Woody wrote that are funny. And so his movies, and he's got 13 Oscars from sticking the camera in the corner. Watch his movies and see if they move. They don't. They don't have to because they're really well written. And I guess that would be the other advice I would give to anybody. I would give this advice to everybody. The number one thing you must strive for is to have great ideas.
And to boil it down, all you need to do is to make the audience wonder what happens next.
Yep.
That's all you have to do.
Yep.
Everything else is secondary.
The building's on fire. How are they going to get out?
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
If that tension goes away, if you don't care what happens next, well, then you're in trouble.
That's right. Anyway, I love your movies, and I hope you understand that, because we've gone through all kinds of different levels as friends and artists, and working together and discussing problems and fixing things, and it always comes back to that. Your ideas were great.
Well, thanks, man.
And you throw a dummy off the roof to make the scene work.
It's my first love.
Absolutely. I love it too.
I'm trying to keep the focus of some of these podcasts towards the small guy, because there's plenty of podcasts out there that deal with how to make it in the movie business and how to go to Hollywood and how to... But
it's easy to go to Hollywood.
Sure.
You have to quit your job and buy a Greyhound ticket for the bus. It's $100. The bus leaves every day. Okay? So if you want to leave, leave. I spent a number of years trying to get a girlfriend to come with me and go back to Hollywood. And eventually I came to realize that she was deeply rooted in the Pacific Northwest. It was cruel for me to say, here, pull up your roots, come with me. You have no idea what's going to happen, but it'll be great. So I see where I went wrong there. But if you want to go and work in Hollywood or in London, that's a very good center for filmmaking, or Toronto or Vancouver, you got started in Vancouver, didn't you?
That's where I went to school, yeah.
Yeah.
Followed Kevin Smith to the Vancouver Film School and learned how to make movies there. Yeah. A little piece of advice I would give is that find a specialty in filmmaking and get good at that. I don't think I would recommend being what I am, which is a producer that does everything on my film sets. I write, I shoot, I edit, I do the music.
Delegation is where it's at, man.
I'm an artist, and I don't really necessarily always care what's going to happen with the end product. I just want to create a funny story. But it doesn't pay off all the time. So if you're wanting to get into filmmaking, I would recommend becoming very good at something and going in that direction, and you'll find success at it.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
How can people get a hold of you?
Oh yeah, I'm at samlongoria.com.
And you are accepting editing jobs now, or you mentioned that you were trying to get in the editing.
It's the thing I love doing more than anything else.
So if somebody wants to hit you up to work for them, to work with them, are you producing? Are you
just
editing?
better be good. Well, I just want to do more editing.
Okay.
I just realized that I don't know why I've spent so much time away from it.
Well, thank you, Sam, for sitting in the podcast today. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Longoria. We've been working together for got to be 12 years now.
Yeah.
Several productions. So if you are out there listening and you've made a movie, perhaps one movie that you spent $5,000 on, and nobody seems to want to watch it right now, give me a call, drop me an email, send me a link to it. I'd like to check it out, and if it's something that's interesting, I'll have you on the podcast. We'll talk about it for an hour. Like I say, my main interest is just the low-budget, gritty stuff that people spent no money on. But the story's got to be decent. It's got to be an interesting story.
It's got to be good!
And, it doesn't have to be technically good, because I'll go onto Netflix and watch, Mindhunter or Fargo, or I'll go watch something that is technically perfect if that's the direction I want to head. But I'm definitely interested in some of the low-budget work out there. You know, if you have a Clerks, if you have a Dead Pet, if you have an El Moriarty, if you have something you spent no money on, give me an email, and maybe we can talk about it. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the Indie Film Chat.